Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This is Yakesh Bobade, and in today's video we'll be discussing ReactJs. We'll have a quick introduction and also we'll go in a bit more detail to the use cases, what exactly is ReactJs and what are its different components, why is it used, why are so many people learning ReactJs, and why are so many companies using ReactJs to build their sites. Other than that, we'll also discuss how to create React project and create React components that you can build your own React website right after watching this video. Okay, so let's get started. So what we'll cover in this lessons, the introduction to React.js, why should you learn it, and setting up a real React.js project in VS Code. We'll be using VS Code as an ID, but you can use any ID that you're comfortable with. Introduction to JSX element. So JSX element is basically the basics for React. Every React component is created is basically a JSX element, right? Now, the next thing we'll do is understand the basic React project structure, how every project in React should look like, what are React components. So React.js uses this creating components, creating reusable components. So we'll understand what those components are, why they are useful, and how can we create React components ourselves, right? So let's get started. So first, what is React.js? Okay, it's a front-end library, right? What front-end means is basically the user interface that you see on any website, right? The look and feel of that website is basically what front end means, what user interface means, what UI means. So React.js is basically a framework, a library designed for creating that user interface. It's an open source library, means anyone in the world can access it for entirely for free, and you can even contribute new features. It uses UI components, as I said, and basically what it does is it divides the website into several smaller components and uses those components again and again in the whole website. So that's what UI components is, right? It is meant, it was originally created by Meta, right? And it has a community of individual developers that regularly contribute to it. So yeah, the next thing is, why should you learn React.js, right? Because there are other libraries and frameworks as well. So why should you learn React.js? So it's very fast and it's very easy to create interactive UI in this. What does interactive mean? Basically, users can interact with it. Users, when user clicks, something happens. So things like this, the dynamicness of the site can be increased easily by using React.js, and it is very easy to learn. It is has a very fast learning curves for any newbies who come into this. A lot of job opportunities, right? You must have seen this for yourself. That's why you are probably learning this, right? There are a lot of job opportunities because companies are using this to create their own websites, right? There is a big and supportive community of developers, so any issues you face as a newcomer, you'll probably get it answered by the community, right? So yeah, that's enough for an introduction. We'll just start a new React.js project in VS Code now. This is the official documentation of React.js, and this is the code to start a new project. How I reached there, it's very simple. You can just for React docs, React.js docs, and you'll directly have this first link of getting started with React, right? So this is the official documentation, and you can read all of this. This is some basic things that if you are first timer, it might be helpful for you, but for now, directly click on this link, create a new React app. This will directly give you the code that you need to get started with a React project, right? So what we'll do is directly use this code that they've given to create a React project. So let's copy this first line, right, and run this on our terminal. So here is my VS Code terminal, and here you'll see we only have two presentations in this folder that I've opened. So what this command does is it will this create React app is the command to create a new React project, and this is the name, right? So for example, if I remove this and I want to name my project, let's say basics of React, right? So what it'll do is it will create all the install some basic packages and create a project folder named basics of React. So it might take some time depending on how fast or slow your computer is. Yeah, so let's just skip forward to that part. So as you can see, it took a couple of minutes even in my computer, probably because I had recording going on as well. So yeah, basically what it did was create this basic folder, basics of React, that the name that we gave, right? Then inside that it installed a basic template of a React project, and then it also installed these dependencies, basically the packages that is required for a React project. These three testing libraries and web vitals are not required, but it's a good practice to have these as well. But these three are the main requirements for a React project, right? So it already installed it. This node modules folder contains all those packages that it installed, right? So these were the things that were happening with just this one command, right? So next thing, it tells us what to do. So we can run npm start. It starts the development server, right? Npm run builds create a production build for us. It creates a build folder. Inside that, only required files that you can use for deployment purposes is created. Then this runs the test runner and npm run eject. These are some commands that will run later, but the main thing is first it tells us to first change into this basics of React project, right? Right now I'm in its parent folder, and then run npm start to create the development server as it states here. So what I'll do is directly just open the Visual Studio Code in this directory itself. So I'll just write. So this will open a Visual Studio Code inside that folder, and I'll close the earlier window. Now basically what I'll do is I'll run npm start, the command that they told us. What this does is it creates a server and runs the React project on a local environment, right? So that's what the npm start does. So this is the basic template for the project that command already installed for us, right? So it's a basic React project. It's already created for us. It's hosted on the 3000 port locally. Now what we'll do is, before we actually discuss this source folder, the public folder, and each of the files in it, before we do that, I'll make you guys understand what JSX is. I'll give you a brief introduction about JSX, right? So here you see that this app.js file is basically a JSX element. So I'll just remove this to make you guys understand. For example, if I remove, here you see this learn React, right? I can just remove this and write basics of React project, right? And you'll see that it recompiles it for us and the changes are immediately represented, right? So basically this is the component that is being shown right here on this website, right? So the components like this in basic, in which you can directly write the HTML code inside the JavaScript file. This is basically what JSX is. So JSX is basically a JavaScript extension. Basically, I'll just write the definition. JSX is basically a JavaScript extension. JS is basically an extension of JavaScript syntax, and it allows us to use HTML directly inside the JavaScript file, right? JavaScript code. So that is what JSX does. And here what we are doing is basically writing the HTML, this div, then header, defining it as a JSX element, and exporting it, right? And this export we are using in this index.js file and writing it right. So now you understand, like at least get an intuition about what JSX is, right? Basically this HTML inside the JavaScript code, that is what JSX is. That is what JSX element represents. And React is completely dependent on these JSX elements, right? As you can see, this website that we have opened, this is a JSX element that is showing. So yeah, React is based on this. Now what we'll do is try to understand each and every file of this project template that we have created, right? So what we have is a public folder. Whatever is inside this public folder is accessible everywhere, right? So basically what is happening is this public folder, inside that this index.html, this is the only file that is needed. This is basically our website. Okay, since React is helpful for creating a single page application, right? It only requires one HTML file, right? So this is that index.html. So when we go to our website, this index.html file is served by a browser, and everything else inside this source folder, it's just React sending it to this index file, right? I'll show this to you guys. When we go to index.js in the source folder, so public folder basically is the main required folder which serves our main index HTML file, right? But in source, we write the code for anything, for everything inside that website, right? For example, here in this index.js file in the source folder, what we are doing is we are asking it to render this app component that I showed you. It's a JSX component which basically has all the HTML contained in it, and we are rendering that app component inside this document.get element id root. So where is this root, right? This is in the public.index.html file, this element root. What we are doing is we are telling this method create root to render this app JSX element inside this root directory in the index.html file, right? So that is what is basically happening. React is directly rendering this JSX element inside this root div directly for us without us doing anything else, right? So actually what we'll do is, to make you guys better understand, I'll just directly delete this src folder and we'll create it from scratch. What we'll do is we'll create a new folder. Actually, we'll create a new folder, name it src, and in that we'll first create a new index file, right? So what we'll do is we'll import React DOM from React DOM/client library, and we'll create a root out of that. So what we want is, from the React DOM dot create root method, what we'll do is we want to render everything inside this index.html root element, right? So we'll directly select that by saying document dot get element by id, and we'll provide the root element, right? So this will directly give us that root element, and in that root element we want to render JSX components, right? But for now we don't have any JSX component in the source file, right? So let's just create a JSX component. It doesn't have to be named app.js, all right? That was just an example. So what we can write is basics.jsx. You can even give a syntax JSX that basically tells the ID that it's a JSX element, right? So there are two ways to create JSX elements, right? The first is class-based components, and the second is functional components, right? So first we'll see how to create class-based components, but nowadays functional components are used much more often, so we'll describe functional components later and in much more depth, right? So actually let's just read it through documentation. Instead of me directly giving you the syntax, it's better to become familiar with using the documentation here. So you can directly search on the documentation class components, and in main concepts you will find function and class components. So these are the two type of components, this function component and this class component. So I'll just directly copy the syntax, and this is what it gives, right? See, this red line indicates that there is an error. The basic error is we haven't imported React, right? So we'll import React, right? So this will erase the component, and what we have to do is we have to export this class as well, right? Now we can render that class by saying we'll use this tag to create. So VS Code automatically uses the intelligence to give this for us. So it's importing that welcome element that we exported, and we can directly use it as a tag, right? What it will do is it will render this welcome JSX tags in this root element. So now if we see, so we'll run npm start again. Since we deleted the whole src folder, it's better to restart and create your restart your server, right? So we'll press npm start to restart our project, and we'll see there is no error and hello is being printed. Why is that? Because we are rendering this welcome component, which is here, which basically just says just a heading hello, and this dot props dot name is, this is something that we will discuss later, but we can write here whatever we want, right? So hello world, it directly renders it. Now there are some rules that JSX follows, right? Some rules that you have to keep in mind. We can only return one element in JSX, right? For example, here we are only returning h1, right? So you can't write two elements, like I can't return h1 and h2, something like this. So this red line shows it's an error, right? See, this error basically says, this error says adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. What does it mean? Basically, you can only return one tag in an JSX component, not just class-based, but even functional components, right? You can only return one tag. So what it means is you just have to, you can just create some empty tag. These are called empty React fragments, and you can wrap everything inside this. We can nest however many elements that you want, however many HTML tags that you want inside a single component, as long as you are returning only one component, right? So I'm only returning this empty fragment, but inside these empty fragments there are two headings, right? So these are headings are being shown. So this is one thing that you have to keep in mind, and there are some other changes as well. Like in HTML you used to write class, right? But in JSX you have to write class name like this. And if you are using a label in the form, you used to write for in HTML, but you'll have to write HTML for in JSX. So these are some differences that you have to keep in mind when you are using JSX, right? So this doesn't have to be empty, right? You can even write just div. The main point is just returning a single element. Okay, so that's basic about JSX. Other than this, what you can do is nest components inside components, right? I already told you that there are class based components and functional components. So this was an example of class based components. Next we'll see functional components. So let's go back to, so we can see directly in the documentation itself. This is one example of creating functional based components. So what you can do is directly create here. We'll change the welcome name to nested, because what we'll do is and one key thing to note here is you have to give this names a capital letter. If you don't, the React will give you an error. Okay, you have to keep these names in capital letters. Only the first letter should be capital. Okay, and what you can do is like this function. What you can do is export this nested function directly. So now we have created another JSX elements, but now we used the function syntax from JavaScript. You can even create functions like this, right? You know the arrow function syntax, right? So you can write const and define a function like let's say nested2, and we'll create an arrow function, and in that we'll just create a JSX element like this. We'll return a heading and we'll write arrow function. Here we'll write nested element, and here we'll remove this entire thing and just simply write a paragraph with saying class based. So we have three components. What we can do is first we want this nested element inside this component, so we can nest components inside another component, right? So we'll write nested here. That's it. And this nested2 will directly try to import this here. Now, as I told you, JSX elements only return with one tag, right? This is also one such example. If I directly try to write welcome and let's say nested here, it will show me this red lines, basically meaning error, right? So it will give you the same error that JSX cannot be aligned side by side. So what you can do is wrap them in an empty fragment, or you can directly give them a div as well, right? So as you can see, the error is not there in class-based nested element and nested element. What you can do is actually we'll write nested2 here, and this nested will just have it here. So in welcome we should see class-based component. After that we should see this nested element this nested2 element which says arrow functions right here, and this is what we exported here, and this nested should be seen here. So as you can see, class based, an arrow function, and then nested element. So this is the way we can create and export and import different components like this. We can create components and nest them within itself. We can also just create a new file for that. To keep our code simple, we can create a new file saying nested.jsx, and we can write the code. We can just cut and paste the code from here and paste it here, right? So this is a separate function component, right? And you have to change this. You'll have to remove this because we changed the file, right? So if I write it again, now it's being imported from the nested.jsx files that we created, right? So here you'll see it works the same. All we did is just write the code for this component in a separate file. So this has become a lot simpler, right? We can also just cut this code and write it in a separate file as well. This way you'll keep your code simplified, right? You can just create a new folder, name it components, and you can create more files like this. Like for home, you can have home folder, then you can have a footer folder for footer, and you can just copy and paste elements in those, right? This is how you can follow a proper standard of a React project, right? And this index file is how you can create a basic React project. I think I have given you in like basic feel about how to create React project, how to create JSX elements, right? And how to browse through the project structure, right? And how to create it yourself from the scratch, right? So now if you have even the basic knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then you can create your own projects. You can using ReactJs. You can just create a new file right? app.css. You can use CSS file, you can use JavaScript, you can just import them, and you can just import those CSS files by saying import app.css. This is how you can import those CSS files in the JSX element, right? So if you have the slightest knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then you'll, with the introduction that I have given you, you can create your own website now using that prior knowledge. So I think that's enough about introduction. That's more than enough for this particular video. And before we go, I would like to cover this last topic that this second last topic that I have not covered yet. Why are React components used? For example, this side, the React documentation side, if you actually see it, you'll find that it can be broken down into different components, right? This component right here, the top component, like the black one, this can be one component, like the header, let's say it is a header component, right? Then the second component is this gray one. You can say this is the navigation component. This middle one, this main page, you can consider this to be the main component, okay, the main home page component. Then on the right side, this can be the right side component. So any website can be broken down into smaller components, and that is what React is all about. You use those components, and you can even reuse those components in a different project or in the same project as well. Like, components are very useful when you have to reuse the code, when you have to break the site and make it into simple and smaller components. That is why React is very useful, and that is why the React components are so powerful. I think I've covered every topic in this list that I created, and I think with this video I was able to provide every bit of introduction about React project, so that you are able to create your own project. Okay, and that's it for this video. Thank you, and see you guys later.